Well, it's 7:30, and we have a special D93 live tonight. We're talking about CKLA, the curriculum. This is a great topic, and we wanted to give it some extra time, and we're ready to go. Let's turn it over to Superintendent Woolstenhulme.
Thank you, Phil, and appreciate those of you that are joining us. We have a few guests that have joined us tonight as our guest panelists, and I'll introduce them in just a minute. And then we also have a few people that have joined us on the webinar, which I really appreciate people taking the time out of their busy schedules to take some time and learn more about this proposed adoption. And Jason and I are going to spend a few minutes talking about our journey to get us to this point, the reasons why we're looking at this particular program. And really, we're here to try to answer questions and address any concerns or conceptions or things that people may have heard about this particular program. So we're excited to be here. And again, I want to just express appreciation. We have a few representatives from Amplify with us. They have helped other districts work through the adoption process over the past several years. I've worked with a lot of schools that are very close to us here in Idaho and in Utah, as well as other states across the country. And just great to have their expertise and their experience that they can share some of the things that they've seen in those other districts. And so with us, we have Michelle Hart, Yvonne Rhoda, and Christine Fretch. Is that the right way to pronounce your last name, Christine? So appreciate all of them taking some time this evening to be with us and giving up their evenings as well. So with that, Jason and I are going to take just a few minutes, do again some background information and introduction on the time that we spent looking at different reading programs, curricular resources that are out there, and why we have started with this one as our proposed adoption that we're now going through the process and seeking input from our teachers and from our community on whether they believe that this is the right program adoption for us as a school district. So to start, I want to come back to our pyramid of student success, something that we talk about, I would say, in almost every D93 Live. And as we talk about designing success for every student, then these are the essential outcomes that we know we need to achieve as a school district to ensure students have the opportunities that they need in life. And at the foundation of that, right after ensuring that students feel safe, connected, and cared for, on the academic side of the pyramid, on the left-hand side, we know that students learning to read is an absolutely essential responsibility that we have as a school district, and something our teachers work very hard, very diligently to achieve. And like a lot of things in life, working hard is absolutely one key aspect of that. But to ensure that all kids learn to read, doing the right work is also super important. And through, I would say, nobody's fault. We all do the best we have with the knowledge and skills that we know at the time. But not just in our district, but across the state, across the country, there's just been a lot of ongoing discussions about why in our country do we have this plateau with not being able to help every student learn to read. If we look at other countries, and I'm a former English major, so I've learned a second language. I have a pretty decent understanding of how English works and other languages work, and lots of different languages are structured differently. They have different alphabetic principles. There's a lot of factors that contribute into why reading performance in America is different from other countries in the world. But that being said, we've done a lot of research to say, what are those key practices that we need to look at as a country, and what do we have to think about doing differently to ensure all kids learn to read? And there's been a lot of different ideas that have been proposed over years. Some things I would even consider educational fads, that people catch hold of this idea and it becomes really popular without necessarily a lot of research behind that idea. But it sounds good or it feels right. And so all of a sudden you see a lot of districts adopting those ideas, but they don't really turn out that they work very well. And so our teachers have been asking literally for at least a decade, for as long as I've been in the school district, in the district office. And I'd say even going back to my time as an elementary principal, which goes back to 2009 and 2010, our teachers were asking, can we please get updated resources for teaching reading? And, I think our last true elementary reading adoption as a district was probably back in the early 2000s. And so we're literally working off of almost 20-year-old curricular resources, which means our teachers have had to do a lot of going out and finding on their own what they think the right resources are, Sometimes that even involves our teachers paying for resources. And so very understandable that for the past decade, our teachers have over and over again said we need better and more up-to-date resources for us to help kids learn to read. And so we spent a lot of time discussing this. I know it probably feels to our teachers like that's fallen on deaf ears. I can promise our teachers it hasn't. We've had a lot of conversations over that decade about what are the right materials. But before we go out and we invest significant amount of money as a large district in materials, let's make sure that we have the right things that we know are going to actually have the impact that we want them to have, which is ensuring all kids learn to read. I think probably the most recent really large scale adoption that we had at the elementary level was with Math in Focus. And that was, I don't want to say it was a rushed adoption, but we were given the Common Core standards at the state level. We knew we had to significantly shift our instruction. We went out and we bought a program that looked really good. Our teachers had a brief training on that. I think we spent a day training our teachers, and then we said, all right, it's yours, go ahead and run with that. And within about 2 to 3 years, our teachers started moving away from that adoption and started looking for other things because they didn't feel like it was fitting their needs. And so Jason and I have had a lot of conversation for the past 5 years of we don't want to repeat that. We want to make sure that as we select the right curriculum resources for our teachers, we're doing something that's going to be usable for them and something that they feel is the right meeting their needs, but that we also know is based on the right research to ensure that it's going to do its job of helping all kids learn to read. So we've spent a lot of time learning ourselves on what that should look like, and not just Jason and me, but all of our elementary principals have been engaged in this. Our instructional coaches have been engaged in this, and I know a lot of our teachers have been too, just on their own, spending a lot of time learning through their own professional learning. What does it take to really have evidence-based reading instruction? So this is a great quote. This is from Louisa Moats. We're going to quote her a couple of times tonight. She's actually a local Idaho educator who's done a lot of research and a lot of work on this idea of what does the research say about how kids learn to read. And so from her book titled Teaching Reading is Rocket Science, published back in 2020, she has this great quote that says, to ensure that all students learn to read, including those that experience difficulty, our instructional practice and programs must be based on evidence of how students learn to read, not on individual opinions or preferences. And a lot of times, because we haven't done a great job with showing what that evidence is, we haven't done a great job of, and I'm just not talking in our district, but again, across the state, across the country, the teachers are left up to their own opinions or preferences on what they think should work best, and really doing the best they can with the tools that they have. But it's time that when we know better, that we can do better. And so we're really trying to look and say, what are the right resources that are out there? What are the right practices that are out there that we know if we implement these things in our classrooms, that it's going to help every kid learn to read, and especially those ones that are struggling in our classrooms that we haven't been able to reach. So to that end, we adopted phonics first as one first step. We adopted that about 4 years ago because that was one key part of our instruction that as a system was missing across the system. Now, I'm sure we had individual teachers that were doing a great job of teaching phonics, but we hadn't done anything to support that expectation in every classroom across the district. And so that was one key step that we took, is we said we have to start looking at phonics instruction. And we'll talk a little bit about why as we go through these slides. So all that evidence collectively over the last few years, people have started to refer to that as a science of reading. And one interesting that happens in our current political climate is whenever something gets a name put onto it, then unfortunately we start to see it get to be politicized, and people start to look for ways candidly to use that to criticize the education establishment. And I've been doing this job long enough that I recognize that there are special interest groups out there that are really looking to try to I'm trying to think, I had a legislator recently that expressed it to me, but to really discredit public schools so that they can defund public schools and eventually dismantle public schools. Like that is an organized movement that's out there. And so as ideas, even good ideas like evidence-based reading instruction, get popularized and people put names on them, and people start to try to find ways to twist that or to find extreme examples of things to fit a political agenda. And so when we talk about the science of reading, I really hate using things that turn into buzzwords, but I think it's an important word for us all to understand. And that is, it's not an ideology, it's not a philosophy, it's not a political agenda. And for our teachers, I think this is super important. It's not a one size fits all approach to reading instruction. It's not a program of instruction or even a specific component of instruction. It's none of those things. What it is, and again, using Dr. Moats, an Idaho resident and an educator, she said it's the emerging consensus for many related disciplines based on literally thousands of studies about how we learn to read, what goes wrong when students don't learn, and what kind of instruction is most likely to work for the best for most students. So it's really that whole idea of, as we look at all this evidence, can we find the common best practices that we know are going to help give us the best chance of helping all students learn to read. So what is that evidence? So there's just a couple of big ideas. And again, I think one key thing is, well, that term, the science of reading, has been relatively new in as far as a popular term in education. The research supporting this, there's nothing new about it. It goes clear back to 1986. And then from there, but back in 1986, as we were experiencing even then this tension about how do we help all students learn to read. I would say, for context, for anybody that's a fan of education history, 1983 was a super critical year in American education. That's the year that A Nation at Risk was published. That was really a very candid criticism, and I don't think necessarily merited, but a really candid criticism of the outcome of American education compared to other countries. And it really started this conversation about what do we have to do differently as a country to help be successful. And one of the key things that as a country we started looking at was reading instruction. And so back then, lots of tension about whether you should teach phonics or whether you should have a whole language approach. And really what the simple view of reading said is you have to have both. You have to have both a component of your reading instruction where students are learning to recognize words. That includes the phonics part that we talk about, as well as a language comprehension where kids are understanding, or they have the ability to develop the language skills so that they can understand the words once they've actually learned to read them. So there's a great study about this called the baseball study, where it showed that really if kids could read every word about baseball, but they'd never been had any experience with what baseball is, then they couldn't understand that passage. Where kids that had better background knowledge or language skills, they could actually read more effectively than kids that were just taught on the phonics side. But ideally, we have to do both. We have to bring both of those things together if we want all students to eventually learn to comprehend and read, I would say, with both comprehension and with fluency. Then if we fast forward about 15 years after that, in 2000, the National Reading Panel was convened. Again, same conversations about, okay, it's been 17 years since A Nation at Risk. We still haven't seen a lot of progress in our country. What does it take to help students learn to read? And so across the country, they brought together experts in reading, and they identified what they called the 5 pillars of literacy, and talked about each one of these individual components that has to be a part of reading instruction if we want kids to learn to read effectively. And then shortly after that, a researcher by the name of Scarborough kind of brought those ideas together, expanded them a little bit, but talked about how, again, going back to that simple view of reading, where we have to have both language comprehension skills, and he broke down exactly what some of those skills are, things like background knowledge and vocabulary, language structures and verbal reasoning, and the phonics side of things, or the word recognition side, with being able to decode words or basically be able to sound words out, how we have to blend both of those things together. And so really what Scarborough was arguing is we can't look at those skills as discrete skills that kids need to learn one at a time. The whole idea is students have to learn, if they're going to become good and proficient readers, to bring all those skills together, kind of weave them together. So the metaphor that he used for that was a rope, where kids become increasingly strategic and automatic in their reading ability. And that eventually leads to fluent reading. So like we talked about, as we looked at our overall approach with reading instruction about 5 years ago, we recognized that this part of Scarborough's rope with the word recognition was a deficit for us, and we needed to do something to bring more systematic instruction as a district to our classroom teachers And that's where we introduced the Phonics First program. What we didn't do at the time was look at that other part with the language comprehension side. And so that has still been a deficit for our teachers, not having the right curricular resources to teach that systematically across the district. Which brings us to Amplify CKLA. So after we brought off on the Phonics First, we again spent a lot of time training our teachers on that. That's been a fairly heavy lift for our teachers, but now we feel like it's time for us to really look at that other side, the language comprehension side, and so that's why we've been looking at Amplify CKLA. So Kurt, Jason, that was pretty quick introduction. Did I skip anything? I didn't give you much of a chance to talk. Like usual, I get going and I don't pause. So I'm going to pause there and see if you want to add anything else to that introduction.
No, I think, well, and I'll just go back to really our focus in our district leadership team, gosh, probably 5 years ago, before we even got into the phonics conversation, is we were saying as a district, what do we need to do right now? Because we knew there was a number of things we needed to do as far as the science of reading went, but it was like, okay, how are we not going to overwhelm our teachers trying to provide some resources? So really that was where the phonics first conversation came from, is in our district leadership team with our especially our leaders in that team, then going to our elementary team, then them going back to their teams, coming back to us saying, yeah, we think phonics is a great place to start. Let's do something with that, and then we'll see what comes next. And really those over those years, that's just kind of been that progression of what we've tried to do.
Perfect. Thank you, Jason.
And I'd say also just understanding that we, I mean, it's been a long, like you said, a long conversation. We spent a lot of time with it, of just trying to really support and try and do what's right for our teachers without, because things are expensive, and we don't want to just purchase something to purchase. We want to make sure that it's something that our teachers can be supportive of.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, Jason. And as you know, as we've talked over the last few months, of course, we're in Idaho. We have a tight budget, and so we know that financial investment is one key thing. The other thing that is just I think even more precious than those dollars is our teachers' time. And so what we don't want to do is take a lot of time for professional development for our teachers on something that isn't going to work, and not just the professional development side, but just that we refer to it as bandwidth, but just that teachers' energy and work that they put into trying to implement something in their classroom is a heavy lift. And so we've really tried to be very mindful to say, let's make sure that we're adopting the right thing as we ask teachers to do something different than what they've done in the past. So where we are today is, as we've looked at different programs, we've learned that number one, Amplify CKLA is absolutely based on that science of reading. So those principles we just talked about of how students learn to read. It is if we would have adopted a curriculum, and I may be wrong here, but it feels like 8 to 10 years ago, Amplify CKLA would have even been on our radar. I'm not even quite sure when it came out, but it's not one of the traditional publishers that we've always looked at. And so it feels relatively new, and maybe somebody from Amplify could talk about exactly when Amplify CKLA was developed for us.
Sorry. Yes. Hi. You're right. It has been around since science of reading was a cool, well-known thing for sure. And CKLA, the beautiful thing about CKLA is, since it was the first and only curriculum created from the need for science of reading, that's how it kind of started. Educators were getting together going, there's all this research, but nothing exists. And so it was originally created as a free open source tool for teachers to use. That's Core Knowledge Foundation that originally started it. We partnered with them. And CKLA, the cool thing is, someone who taught personally an older edition, the content, we add bells and whistles, we add more technology, we add more accessibility features. We've never had to change the instruction, because it's always been rooted in the science of reading.
Yeah. And that's one thing I really appreciated as we looked at the different programs, is just like anything, as soon as something becomes kind of this, I'd say a buzzword in education, everybody wants to say, oh yeah, we do that, we do that, we do that. We saw it with Common Core. We've seen it with social emotional learning. Everyone wants to say, yeah, we do that. But this program really was built on that foundation, like from the ground up, saying, here are the principles. Let's build curricular resources that are based on that, not well, we have these resources, we've had them for 20 years, now we're going to show how they align to it. So for us, I think that's been one key reason, or one thing that has really set Amplify CKLA apart. I'm sure other publishers will probably have a different take on that, but I just know for Jason and me and other people that have looked at this, that's been one key consideration for us. And so go ahead, Jason.
Sorry, Scott. And I was going to say, and really that was, as we were just trying to decide, and this was a couple of years ago, I was saying, okay, what's out there? I remember having a conversation with a couple of our elementary principals, and we were talking about the core knowledge, and I was like, oh man, I'm going to go look at core knowledge. So I went and looked at core knowledge's website, and I'm like, oh heck, if we could figure out how to, because the information even on there, even the free part of it was like, oh man, this is really good information. This is good resource for our teachers. And it was like, and then, as you start to look at the CKLA and do more research on it, you start to get other things. Amplify starts to come up. You start seeing different podcasts, and it really just started really that rabbit hole that you can get into with lots of resources, things you find on the internet. But really, that's what got us really, I don't know if excited is the right word, but just getting that research and then trying to focus on that.
Awesome. Thanks, Jason. And one thing I was going to do at the start that I didn't, this is a little bit different format for us doing the webinar. And it looks like we now have 23 people online. So appreciate everybody taking the time to do that. That's 23 more than we had at our live event at Tiebreaker before spring breaks. That's fantastic. So as we've gone through and talked about this, because this is a webinar format, you do have the option to go ahead and click where it says Q&A on your screen. And if you have questions about the things we've talked about, things you want clarification about, please feel free to type that in there. We'll just have a couple more slides to go through, and then we'll come back and we'll start answering those questions for you. So, so the second thing we've learned is that Amplify CKLA has met expectations on all indicators in independent evaluations. One of those is ED reports. It's not the only one we've looked at, but you can see across the board met expectations in every grade level, both in terms of quality of the resources that are there and the usability for our teachers. So again, we've done a lot of work before we brought this forward. We've had a few questions about, well, how come you're only looking at Amplify CKLA? How come you're not looking at other ones? Well, we have looked at other ones. This one for us, Rose, is our number one recommendation that we wanted to put out and see if this is right. And then again, as we go through the process, and we'll talk about the process here in a minute, if we get a different response from our teachers in our community, we'll go back and we'll look and see other things that are out there. But we felt like the very best thing to do was to find what we felt was the very best program, put that forward to our community and our teachers, and then take it from there. So what we have decided is we did do a pilot of Amplify CKLA. We did that at Yukon Elementary, Cloverdale Elementary, and Falls Valley Elementary this school year. And then the other thing that we're currently doing is seeking that feedback from our teachers and our families on whether we should, just like I mentioned, adopt CKLA district-wide. Things that we have not yet decided is, while we have said that this is the program we're looking at to start, we still have not made the decision that this is what's going to be presented to the school board. So the input we received from our teachers in our community is absolutely critical to us deciding whether or not we're going to make that recommendation to the board. And then one other key thing with our teachers, and this is becoming a little bit more clear, I think, for us compared to when we first presented this to teachers a few weeks ago. But Amplify CKLA has two components to it, like we've talked about. It has the core knowledge, it builds those language skills for our kids, as well as a knowledge and skills portion that does include a phonics component, but it's not limited to just the phonics component. It also includes a writing component to it. It includes decodable readers, which basically are texts that kids read that kind of help build their reading fluency and their ability to take those skills that they're learning through the phonics instruction and apply them into reading passages. And so that's been an ongoing conversation of whether if we do adopt both, then how does that intersect with phonics first? What's going to happen with phonics first? And right now, those aren't conversations that we feel like we need to have right now. What the conversation we really want to have is, do we feel like this is the right curricular resources to provide to our teachers and our kids? And then if it is, then we'll start talking about what does that look like in terms of how this marries with phonics first? And so other things that are still not 100% decided is, again, if it is adopted, what grade levels we'd begin enrolling the program out to. I would say I think there's a bit of good news from the state legislature, and I absolutely want to give our gratitude to the state legislature for some decisions that were made. Nothing's finalized yet, but in the Joint Finance and Appropriations Committee on Friday, they did approve a supplemental appropriation that will help fill the gap in what we've lost with our funding shift from enrollment back to attendance. We estimated we lost about $6 million from that we used ESSER dollars to backfill. JFAC's recommendation looks like we'd get about 4 out of that $6 million back, which is huge. We didn't think we'd get necessarily anything back. And so the reason why that matters is when we originally started looking at adopting Amplify, our intent was to use the ESSER dollars to do that. And then again, we really had to lose those with that loss in state funding. But now we have some money back from the state that will help us look at a rollout for Amplify CKLA and other curricular resources. So, the reason I'm saying that is that helps us have a broader discussion about what grade levels we could potentially roll the program out to. And then that, of course, leads into how much professional learning to plan. Right now, we've had some great conversations that if this is adopted, that Amplify would be available to help us with our August professional development, and I appreciate their help and support for that. And then just like I talked about a minute ago, as we adopt these curricular resources, we haven't had any conversations yet about what's going to be tight and what's going to be loose in the implementation of that. In other words, are teachers going to be required to use it? Are they going to have autonomy to use other things? Really, what are those expectations going to be? We're going to start with the adoption first, and then we'll do a lot of work to work through those policy decisions. So the process then is, again, we've done that background and research in the pilot. That is work that we've been doing, again, over the past 5 to 10 years. Right now, we're at step 2 for this, which is getting feedback from our parents and our community about it and our teachers about it. Step 3 is, and probably a critical step here, is the board has formed a committee, or it's probably the right way to say that is they authorized Jason to put together a committee. That committee is composed of representation from every elementary school, both a parent, at least the invitation was put out there for every elementary school, for both a parent and a teacher. We have a committee that is, I think it's half and half, right, Jason? Half parents and half teachers, which meets the state requirements for that. And so that committee is going to be the one that makes the decision on whether to recommend to the board or not. So we're putting out a thought exchange to get feedback from our community. We're doing this presentation to get feedback. Our committee is going to meet next Monday, and then they'll look at the feedback that they've received and decide what the next step is, if they're going to move that forward to the board, if they're not going to move it forward to the board, if there's other things that they feel like they should do to get more feedback before making a decision. So we have that committee meeting next Monday, which is why we really appreciate people's time tonight, so you can help provide feedback to the committee. And then again, step
Scott,
4 is, go ahead, Jason.
And I was just saying, and we did have a committee meeting already.
Yep.
Once we had one on the 11th, and we had a presentation from Amplify, and we were hoping to be able to get into the materials and have teachers and parents be able to go through it. We just ran out of time, so we rescheduled some more time, and we'll continue to do that until we feel like we have a good look.
Perfect. Thank you, Jason. And then step 4 is, again, deciding on the decision for both the committee and the school board. Is if it is approved, then distributing the resources out to our teachers and planning for that professional learning side for our teachers. So to get that feedback, we did create a thought exchange around this. The thought exchange is d93.org/amplify thoughts. We've had about somewhere around 40 to 50 people participate in that so far, which is a good start. But out of roughly 3,000 parents and 3,000 families and about 300 and so teachers, it's not a huge percent. So we would certainly like to encourage people, even if you don't have thoughts to share, to go on and read the thoughts that are there and rate those thoughts would be super helpful to us. So and so we'll continue to put that out in our family updates, but really the more input we can get on this through that process, the better that will be. So now I'm going to take a minute and just share a couple of thoughts that have come through that. And I'm going to ask our good folks from Amplify to help us respond to some of those questions. So the first couple of slides I'm going to share are, and this is what I like about Thought Exchange. Again, it's an open forum, and you can clearly see when people have pretty contrasting opinions about what we're proposing. So the first one on the left, more of a critical opinion, saying, why are you considering reading curriculum known to be full of critical race theory, sexual themes, and religion? And then as a follow-up, they said, rather than indoctrinating kids, adopt a reading curriculum focused on actually teaching them to read and write with age-appropriate texts. And then a contrasting thought, and kind of interesting, both of these thoughts are rated about the same. They both had a 3.2. I think one was 26 and one was number 27 out of 37 thoughts. And you can see on the star charts up here that pretty wide gap between the people that supported both thoughts and the ones that didn't support those thoughts. But the contrasting view from another parent is, I love the way the curriculum addresses all aspects of reading for my children, every lesson. My core belief is that children need multiple exposures to phonemic concepts, complex vocabulary, and chances to read and listen to a written text. So certainly two widely different thoughts on this. So the first question I'd like to ask our guest panelists is, how do we know that the Amplify CKLA materials are appropriate for their age level? And I think we should think about that both in terms of reading complexity as well as the content that is there. So just open it up for any of you to share your experience in working through this question at other districts, or what you know about how these were developed.
Absolutely. I'm happy to start, and then Michelle can popcorn it to you to fill in any gaps that I left behind. Thank you again for having me here. I'm Christine Freck. I'm here in DC, so if it's a little bit dark, that is why. Super excited to be with you all. And I want to start by saying, we want very similar things for kids as you all want for your own students. We want them to have rigorous learning experiences that unlock their brilliance, that are fun and engaging. And we believe teachers are superheroes and are doing an impossible job, and Amplify is really here to support that. CKLA, first of all, does not contain critical race theory. And we can provide a letter from our CEO attesting to such. We believe firmly in teaching students how to think, not what to think. In terms of age level appropriateness, we go through a rigorous review process with all materials that make its way to publication. That is internal reviews, including through an editorial board, external reviews through focus groups, play-based focus groups, but also those third-party evaluators that you heard mentioned in the earlier presentation. Things like appropriateness and accessibility are measured by ed reports. Additionally, the background material that is part of the knowledge strand of CKLA was recently reviewed by Knowledge Matters through a super rigorous process that Standards Works and Knowledge Matters put out to really verify that not only was CKLA aligned to the science of reading, but the scope and sequence that we bring students through as part of that knowledge strand are appropriate, are rigorous, are engaging, and are really pulling in that background knowledge that will help to capture their lifelong learning and literacy expertise. And so through those processes, we're really mindful of selecting materials and moving forward with materials that are age appropriate. Michelle, what would you add, or what did I miss? You are muted, my friend.
Oh my gosh, it's like I forgot COVID even existed, like, the mute button. So you did a great job, and I don't think there's not much to add. It's just reiterating, we wouldn't be all green. We wouldn't be the highest rated. We wouldn't be on state lists across the country if it didn't work. And one thing that I did, Brenda posted a question. Brenda, I tried to answer it the best I could. But one thing I did post in response to Brenda's question was a list to our efficacy data site. So, so then you don't have to take our words for it. Go look at what schools, the growth data that's working. And if it wasn't appropriate for their age, the chances of us having that growth data is not as likely.
I will add that the efficacy studies and the case studies that have been conducted are third-party case studies. So it's not anything that Amplify
is going out and providing. It is various, educational groups are completing these case studies on rigorous curriculum.
Thanks, Yvonne. The other thing I think is just worth noting here is, as we look at this, and I'll be the first to admit, I have not gone through and I have not read every single text that's there. I've read through some, but it's a pretty significant number of materials. I have a ton of faith in our teachers to know what they feel is age appropriate when it comes to the content of things. And candidly, we live in a very conservative community. I personally feel like I'm a pretty conservative individual myself. My kids, again, have gone through our systems. Jason's kids are in our system. His kids are in our system. Like we're very invested in this, not just as educators, but as parents as well. And so as we look at these things, we're not interested in introducing our kids to things that we do not believe are age level appropriate with the content. So as our teachers see things, if they have concerns about it, they will absolutely share that with us. Jason's done a great job over the past couple of years of establishing a committee that doesn't just, it will apply to this, but applies to any novel that gets proposed, any reading material that gets proposed for our teachers. We go through a process where that gets screened, and it's us that is doing that work to determine whether or not this is appropriate. And if not, then we have processes to find alternative materials that will work for them. So I would say any curriculum that we purchase out of the box, there could be something in there that doesn't fit with our community, and we'll look at those things and then we'll find acceptable alternatives to those. So I do think we've got to look at the big picture when it comes to this, and not if we did find things, and to their credit, we had a parent in our last committee meeting who happens to be a teacher in District 91 who has adopted this, and she shared a few passages from some Greek myths that she thought were, I would say, suggestive. There's certainly nothing explicit in those, but you could certainly make some interpretations or some inferences from that could be maybe not grade level appropriate. And so as those things get shared with us, we'll absolutely find ways to find suitable curricular materials if that doesn't if that goes through the committee review process and we decide that those are not appropriate for our kids.
And Scott,
go ahead, Jason.
Scott, I would say one of the conversations I have with parents all the time about not only standards, but also just different curricular resources is one of the things that I appreciate is that our teachers, we have that local control, right? Our teachers are the ones making that decisions of, hey, here's the essential standards that we feel like need to be taught in our classrooms, in our schools. And then the resources that they're going to use are our teachers using that professional judgment that they have. And our teachers live in our community. They know their students, they know the families, and it's helpful for that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jason. All right, so the second contrasting thought I wanted to share, again, showing two, and again, these thoughts are both kind of towards the bottom of the thought exchange in terms of rankings, but this parent, again, on the critical side said it's heavy on social justice learning. Second graders don't need to discuss, quote, systemic racism or Cesar Chavez or grapple with culturally sensitive content. It's a DEI program first. I had to go do a quick Google search because I wasn't familiar with the acronym DEI. That stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then on the opposite side, a parent that said, I'm really excited about all the topics and would love for my child to learn these things. All of these lessons and topics are incredibly important for kids to have a knowledge of before moving into middle school and high school. So I just want to start, I guess, with my quick response to this. And then again, I'd love to have responses from our representatives from CKLA as well. So number one, I would say from a content perspective, one thing I've appreciated about the resources that are here is they are intended to help our students learn social studies and science skills. So while we're teaching students to learn to read, they're doing that with social studies, primarily I would say social studies and science texts, and that's been a deficit for us as well. A traditional reading collection, we call them basal readers, but this collection of short stories or things for decades has been really heavy on the fiction side. And again, I'm a former English teacher. I love reading fiction, but I also recognize the importance of our kids learning to read nonfiction, and especially on that whole side of language development, having kids learn background knowledge in science and social studies is incredibly important to their future success. So I actually really appreciate this. I think the other key thing is to recognize that we do have a diverse student population that's increasingly diverse. We have right around 18% of our students that are Hispanic. And so I personally appreciate the fact that those kids can read things about people like Cesar Chavez that that relates to them and their background, their history. And it's not just exclusive to, the history that I typically learned when I was in school in Eastern Idaho. So while I wouldn't necessarily agree that it's a DEI program first, but I appreciate the fact that there is that attention so that our kids here in Eastern Idaho, that again, we are becoming more diverse, but we're still a relatively isolated area. We're still predominantly a white area. When it comes to terms of our student population and even our teacher population, I think it's important that our kids are exposed to a larger world that's out there than just what they have here in Idaho Falls. So I'll pause there for a minute and then turn it over to see if anybody from Amplify would like to share your thoughts about this.
Yeah,
Christine,
thanks.
oh yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for starting with that. I think it's really important to ground with local context. Amplify does not have an agenda to push or is interested in indoctrinating students. I'll go back to what I said previously, which is we deeply, deeply care that students learn how to think, not what to think. And the approach that we take to the knowledge strands, the approach that we take to history is to teach an accurate, fact-based history. It is without a specific objective or nuance or perspective that would guide or lead students to any political ideology. It is very fact-based, and at the same time, we are intentional about ensuring that stories represent the student population that we have across the country today. And so we know how important it is. I am a former educator myself, and we know that in order for students to believe that they can be it, they have to see it. And so we are mindful of having representation in stories, but there is not an approach of social justice or diversity, equity, and inclusion as principles or in perspective of the material that we promote in CKLA. Michelle, is it helpful to talk about the Cesar Chavez lesson?
Yeah, you crushed it again. You steal all my thunder. Scott, do you mind if I see I have access to share. Do you mind if I share really quick?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I can't share. It says
Okay. Give me 2 seconds and
Sure.
I'll stop mine. And maybe that'll.
It's been disabled. I was going to show the actual lesson. Let me know, Scott, if you have success finding me and sharing.
Yeah, give me 2 seconds and
Sure.
You should be good to go now.
Okay. Give it a shot. Yes, for the win. Okay. I'm always a big believer in, knowing that the people who raise these concerns raise them based on what knowledge they had and what things they'd seen. So I'm just showing you the Cesar Chavez lesson right here. You can see we talk about Cesar Chavez knew how hard it was to be a farm worker. I'm assuming there's probably lots of farm working families, in your area. He knew that farm workers who did this type of work earned little money, and that even for all the hard work they did. And then it says that he decided to get farm workers together and build this thing called a union, because so many people came together as part of the union. Cesar Chavez found a way to improve lives for farm workers. So you see, it's not even, he's a Californian. We talk about him being in California, growing grapes, and we bring up the vocabulary word courage. So this is the actual read aloud that teachers would read to their students about Cesar Chavez. You can see I'm zoomed in here. They also have a 1 or 2 paragraph about Eleanor Roosevelt and the things she did to make sure that females got to go to school like boys did. And it talks about how African Americans had more poverty, and she wanted to do something about that. That's all it says. What she said or what we should think about that's not where we go. These are famous people And then I want to, if you'll bear with me, and I try not to make you sick here, I did have one more reference to Cesar Chavez, which I love this here. It says, when you're talking about Cesar Chavez, remind students that when faced with injustice, ordinary people can make extraordinary changes for the good of all citizens. I am reading the Cesar Chavez lesson. So I think this is just helpful, hopefully with that grade appropriateness, and also just understanding like there's a lot of really important people that we need to cover, that some have bad reputations for things they did later in life or maybe mistreat, but like we don't go down that world. We're just like, there are people that made change and they were ordinary people. So I just like showing it. And I do welcome hopefully some people, if this is, you want more specifics, like please, we're watching that Q&A, so feel free to jump in.
That's perfect.
Mhm.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And because of, I really appreciate the people again that have joined us tonight and have asked some questions. So before I go into other ones that I had from our thought exchange, I want to go ahead and address a couple of those. So Jason's answered one already, but it's a great question. Will parents have access to the curriculum to read for ourselves before it is voted on? So again, number one, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think through Yvonne, I think through the website you provided, they can read all of the text online. Is that accurate or is that inaccurate?
They can read all the text online through the demo account. So,
Right.
yep, through the
Yep.
demo account, they'll be able to access all grade levels, all read alouds, and all skills readers.
Perfect. So in our last weekly update, we shared a link. We also shared it, I think the week before that as well, but we have created a website specifically for this. And in there is a link to that demo account. And so that would be the simplest thing to do, is you can go onto that demo account and you can click through and read all the text there. As Jason typed in the answer, we also have physical copies of those available in the district office, specifically so parents can come in and they can review those in the district office. We'd love for parents to come in. District office is open between 7:30 and 4:30 Monday through Friday. And so please come in and take a look at those and share your feedback with us. And again, we'll put in another, go ahead, Jason.
And schools will also have samples. They won't have the full units, but they'll have sample units at each of the buildings that parents could also, if they didn't want to have to come in or they didn't want to access it digitally, they could see some of the samples at the school.
Perfect. I do have in our slides before we wrap up, I do have I will show you the link to go to that site we created specifically for Amplify CKLA. So that'll give you that access to that demo site that Yvonne talked about. And then from one of our teachers, she said, can teachers have nonfiction books for students at their reading levels? All of the knowledge texts are teacher read alouds. So love to hear, I guess so I think the whole idea is the knowledge section, those are teacher read alouds, where on the skills section, those are the decodables that kids read. So are there, I guess, what are the thoughts behind that approach so that kids don't have knowledge text that they would read themselves?
Yeah, well, and I think, Miles, great question. The answer is a little tricky because in first grade, they're obviously going to be reading slightly different things than in fifth grade. So, you know, starting in second grade towards the end of the year, that's the first time the kids have book in hand where they're practicing decoding nonfiction text. So up until that point in early, right? 5-year-olds, when they're learning how their sounds and to put those sounds together, the text is not going to be real in-depth nonfiction text because the focus is on that science-based instruction of teaching kids to decode. So I have some decodable readers behind me. I know you might not be able to see them, but if you think about this particular page here, I'm just picking up something random. We needed to make sure that the text difficulty level matched what I had taught them in regards to phonics. So we couldn't jump in and talk about, in this case, it's like a Hawaiian story, like riptides and how the moon affects that, because I haven't taught the double O spelling for ooh yet, so it couldn't be in here and I couldn't talk about the moon. So we do jump to nonfiction once their reading ability, their decoding ability matches that.
Thank you, Michelle. I appreciate that explanation for that. Okay, yep. So had a question about the thought exchange. Again, I will share, I have a slide that'll show both a link to the thought exchange as well as the website as well. So also from Gina, the stories are Sowing the Rainbow and the first, okay, so this one goes back to an earlier question she answered. She just expressed some concern about, again, the grade level appropriateness of some text. And so some examples she used from her review of the materials are Sowing the Rainbow and the First Strawberries.
And sorry, you can tell we're reading.
Yep, so the one is, looks like this is kind of an interesting example, and I hadn't come across this one. We did have actually a curricular committee review of a different book on the same topic about, I think the individual's name is Harvey Milk, if I remember correctly, the rainbow flag. So, just that whole idea, I guess, of introducing the rainbow flag to first graders. So,
Yeah.
yeah. So again, what I would say is, I would really encourage our community, our parents, our teachers to look big picture first, right? Look at, and this goes back to kind of my education as an undergrad at BYU, as we looked at different reading materials for our classes. We were taught, look at the big picture, look at the overall worth of it. And then if there are individual passage or things within that, you need to consider in the scope of it. So again, I'm not going to downplay the concern with any particular passage. It could be there. I would just say, if we feel like overall this is the right approach, then we'll look at those one-off examples to say, okay, how are we going to deal with this particular story? If we don't feel like this is an appropriate one to teach for whatever reason, then let's find an adequate substitute for those. And I would assume on the knowledge base, to me, it feels like it's going to be very different than the skills base, where skills base, we're going to have to teach skill by skill, right? Kids going to have to know every one of those skills to become a fluent reader. On the knowledge base, it feels like there should be quite a bit of professional discretion on which ones we feel like are the right ones to teach and which ones we may not teach. Is that an accurate
Yes. And
thought about
that
that?
is something we work, and I love this. So the two different examples that were shared, the rainbow and then the Judaism, those are two. Yeah. And I love your answer, because those would be addressed totally different. One is one short moment that's easy to be like, well, if we as a district decide we're not going to teach that lesson, someone like me or Christine, like, we would hop on and work with coaches and leaders to go, what standards are missed, what skills should we, that type of a thing. And then, but the other one is a larger question where I believe it was an activity page in the first grade book that was referenced. And that's a culmination of multiple things where they're, so that's it still can be skipped. We have districts that do it, but really those religion ones come up a lot because people see that activity page. And I think if a group like this gets together and reads it first, the text, and then decides, because again, it's just historical. It's really important for students in this grade level. This is where they're learning the difference of self versus community versus larger things like state and then country and whatever. That's where this is coming from, is you have this belief, and guess what? Your neighbor might have something else, and both are okay. Like, it's kind of the discussion. So it's just historical. This is what the holy book is in Hinduism. This is what the holy book is in Christianity. This is what the holy book, that's it. Like, you have them listed. We do the same thing with Native American tribes in kindergarten, where we're like, let's graph out what types of houses did the Pacific Northwest Native Americans live in versus the plains versus whatever. And then we could have a discussion, well, why would they live in different houses? Oh, different climates. So they needed a different house. So it's really something like, read it first. And if you still go, then we work with you to just not teach it. That's fine too.
I think it's important to note too, any of the religion pieces do not proselytize. They do not promote a specific religion. It is important that it's understood that it's to grasp ancient civilization. So our approach to those units is to understand the founding of different parts of the world and how that is very different, right? It's that background and foundational knowledge to understand that that is very different than how America was founded later on religious tolerance and freedom. And so part of it is fully grasping those differences in ancient civilization versus our indigenous community here in America, and understanding that there are still communities that are very based in that ancient perspective. But it does not proselytize, it does not promote, it is very historically accurate and very fact-based.
Thank you. And then Gina had a follow-up question about, will there still be time to teach all the science and social study standards alongside core knowledge curriculum? So again, I've never taught first grade. I'll just start with that one. So, but I really feel like we're putting, in my mind, better resources into teachers' hands to teach science and social studies than, especially those lower grades, than we've ever had. So I could be wrong, but I just don't know the last time we adopted anything that was intentionally teaching those standards. The other answer I'd say is we never have enough time to teach all the standards. We know that. That's why as a professional learning community, we really try to focus on what the most essential standards are and make sure that every kid is learning those. So I think, Gina, you got some great questions. And again, I would say, I think a lot of the questions are really focused on that implementation side. So again, if we feel like this is the right curriculum, how we're going to work through things like the alignment with science and social studies standards. Are there key standards that we may have to look at other resources to provide to our teachers to teach those? And then same thing as far as the number of books in the hands of students each day. So so lots of questions, Gina. I really appreciate your insight on things, and I think you'll provide some valuable help to us as we look through, if we do decide to adopt this, what those key things are that we have to consider as we implement. So, and then I think we had one more maybe that pop up in the chat.
Scott, I'm going to
Oh.
break in here for really quickly and add to the fact that of the why behind the read alouds, and you touched on it when you talked about the background knowledge and building background knowledge and the importance of it. And research shows us that our listening comprehension, right, from birth throughout as we continue to go through our elementary grade levels, our listening comprehension is so much more capable of that, of understanding and comprehending stories. And our listening and reading comprehension don't actually catch up to each other until until a student is in middle school. So where they can read and what they're reading, they are comprehending versus what we're reading aloud so that they're listening to. So another thing about just why we the read alouds, and in terms of historical events, as we take a look at those, I would also maybe reach out to a middle school teacher or a high school teacher and talk about like what standards are called upon. And oftentimes that that's why we start with those topics at such an early age, because they are capable of listening to some of those stories and then being able to talk about them and learn more about them. And as they get into middle school and high school, come with the background knowledge on them.
Thank you for that. And Christina, I appreciate you typing the answer to Gina's other question there. So I think we're just about there for this section, but I do want to give our people that have joined us a chance. If there's any other questions that people would like to pose, again, you feel free to type those into the Q&A. If you're brave enough, you want to raise your hand, I can add you into the screen and you can ask a question face to face as well if you'd like to. And then Phil, I don't know if you're seeing anything on Facebook of reading all the questions just through the webinar, or if we've had any comments or questions posted on Facebook too.
Yeah, we do have some questions on Facebook. There's I'll read Brittany's because it kind of summarizes some of them. I'm just curious if the district has reached out to other districts in Idaho that are using the CKLA and what successes they may have reported.
Yeah, so I would say the one I've talked the most with is our neighboring district, District 91. They did adopt last year. Carla, I respect immensely, especially when it comes to early reading instruction. That is her whole background. So in the past decade, when she was not working in District 91 and she was teaching college, her whole focus is on early literacy. And this is the program that they adopted. And so she is as good as it gets, I think, when it comes to experts on early reading instruction and materials. And so that's definitely one district we've looked at. Jason, I don't know if there's other districts in Idaho, but I that's the one I've talked with the most about it.
Yeah, and may as well, I've talked to a couple of different teachers in 91, and I think like anything, they're still new to the new curriculum and how to teach the different aspects of it. There's one, the Davis School District in Utah is one other one that we've had some former employee. I know one employee that used to work for the Davis School District that works in our district that we may be able to get some information from. But
Do we know if White Pine uses this by chance? That was a question.
I don't, Yvonne, I don't know if you know or not.
You know what, I don't support that account, but I believe they do. So let me double check on that and I'll get that answered for you.
Another question, can you talk about the differentiation up and down built into the reading curriculum? Example of first graders reading at a third grade level.
Yes, and I saw there's another question kind of asking the same thing, differentiation in the skills section. So assuming that there's some parents on here that maybe are just learning, let me just take one step back first. So in the younger grades in CKLA and K1 and 2, teachers spend basically half of their time teaching kids how to read. And they have books like The Cat Bandit, where they're reading, you know, a cute story about a cat, because this is where they're practicing how to sound out and blend and syllable types and things like that. So teachers explicitly teach how to kids to read. And so they will have this in their hand every day, working through that. Now, the other half of the day is more like that, or not the day, that language arts time is more like that Cesar Chavez thing that I was showing, where students don't have a book in their hand. Instead, they're just listening to the text from their teacher. And this has to do with Yvonne's, what she was talking about, that data is, we know that if you want to build comprehension, you have to teach kids to decode, but you have to build background knowledge. So when they decode something or sound out a word, they know what that word means. They know the vocabulary tied to it. They know the schema all around it. So quick backstory, in K2, there's 2 different types of reading that happen every day. So every day the kids are holding these books, with the exception of the first little bit of kindergarten. And then every day the kids are listening and responding to text orally. I think this is the best first, there's many, many, many ways to differentiate, including small groups, including gifted and talented support. But I think the biggest thing to think about here is, imagine, let's start with a first or a 4th grader, will you, or a 3rd grader that is maybe a 1st grade level decoder, but that doesn't mean that they are struggling comprehenders or struggling at other concepts, type of understanding, complete sentence writing and things like that. So it's really valuable that language arts is not always through the eyes and the pen. Half of it is about through the ears and the mouth. Because if you can't hear it, and then you're not going to be able to understand the reading it. And if you can't say it, then you're not going to be able to write it. So that's universal instruction or universal design, which is kind of what we're based on. So then getting back to this, more scaffolds, I'll just name a few. I wish I had enough time to throw some up. We have daily small group activities for K2 teachers to use. That would be a time where she's reteaching that skill. Works for all levels of kids, works for kids that just have been absent, you know, and they are falling behind because of absenteeism. So we got daily small groups. We provide something called an intervention toolkit, which is for any grade level teacher to use. Instructional coaches use this a lot. SPED teachers will use this, because what you do is you go in and you can say, I'm noticing a student is struggling with this type of skill. Maybe it's multi-syllabic words. that teacher can go in and find a small group activity that she could do to support the students. So I don't want to go, I know it's so late, so I don't want to go much further, but I could go on and on and on. I should say one more thing. I was the gifted and talented coordinator for my district, and this was a game changer for the gifted and talented students, because as anyone who works with GT kids, sometimes they're just really high achievers. There's really only 2% of the population that are truly gifted. A lot of them are just really good at school and really good at picking things up fast. And what's beautiful about CKLA is there's so much inference. Like every 10 or 15 minutes, there's some sort of inference thing that is going on. And so those students that might be in a high, labeled in the gifted program or the high achieving program, because they can decode, which makes them fluent, which makes their reading comprehension strong, they might not know a lot about the world. They might not be able to compare and contrast ancient civilizations because they've always just been able to give the right answer really fast. So a little bit, I mean, that's like real broad, I get it. But I think there's two discussions. There's how do you have a tier 1 core MTSS program? And then how do you support high, low language learners, absent kiddos? And we have tools for that that come free with the program.
Awesome.
And
Thank
Scott,
you.
Scott, and I was also thinking about this with our schools. I think our schools do a really, really good job using their libraries as well, for those students that maybe those higher readers, or even just getting our kids reading as much as possible, that CKLA or any other program may not have all of those books that a library is going to have to excite those kids to be able to continue to read outside of even those daily lessons. And so, and our schools do, I feel like they do a great job with their libraries and trying to get kids riding the bike, right? The best way to learn to ride a bike is to do it. Same thing with reading. So
Excellent.
Megan, go ahead.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Phil.
Megan wants to know if all teachers aren't currently using phonics first. It was mentioned at one of the meetings that about 60% of teachers self-reported that they're using phonics first. How will this new program, Amplify CKLA, be implemented? Will it be required? Can the district require it to be used? My concern is D93 being able to collect accurate data on the success of a program if it's not being used by all.
Yeah. So again, I'll go back to those are all policy decisions that we will make once we decide what the right curricular resources that we purchase are. So whether that's Amplify CKLA or not, that's still a conversation we have to have about phonics, right? Because right now, like we talked about, only 60% of our teachers are reported that they are using it and using the specific elements of it. So as a district, those are all conversations that we need to have of where do we need to be tight? And I appreciate our teachers being willing to share with us what they are doing in their classroom, because then we can look and say, are they still achieving great results without using it? If so, what are they doing to do that? Or if they're not, then absolutely we want to say, you know what, this shows this is better practice. This is what other teachers are doing that are getting results. And so we need you to do that as well. So again, those are all conversations we'll continue to have about what needs to be tight with reading instruction and where can we be loose and provide teachers autonomy and flexibility. Anything else from Facebook, Phil, that you feel like we should take a few minutes to answer? I have had a few more come in through the Q&A here on the webinar.
Just real quick, Brittany, she said, did I understand correctly that with CKLA first grade, they wouldn't have books in their hands? It'd be more read out louds.
So
they have a book every day in their hands.
Yeah. So they have a decodable book in their hands every day that's helping them develop that the decodable skills, the word recognition side of it, the language acquisition, and then those are primarily read alouds from the teacher in K and 1. And what about 2, Michelle? Is it still primarily read alouds in 2?
Read aloud every day. And so every day a student is reading on their own, and every day a student is listening to a story. But I think, Scott, this kind of reminds me of a conversation you and I were having earlier, where sometimes there are places that just teach the knowledge strand. It's peculiar, but it happens. And so those schools, those teachers don't know sometimes that they don't have the whole program, that they only have half of it. And so they post like, well, there's no readers, the kids don't read anything, because they only have access to that half of the program, when really this is a 2-lock box, just like you were showing in the beginning, Scarborough's Rope and the Science of Reading and Louisa Moats, all of that stuff. So that sometimes you can find stuff on social media or various places, even news articles where people are saying, well, the kids don't hold books. That's only if you're talking about the knowledge strand, which is only half. That's not where we're teaching kids how to read.
Perfect. And that's why, as initially, that's where we were thinking we would be as a school district, and we only needed that language side. But as we got in and we learned more about everything that goes into the skills portion, and we recognized, oh, that's where the decodables are. That's where kids will be reading. That's where the writing parts are. We recognize that, what, we do need to purchase both as a school district. And as we do that, then we also know we have to have some conversations about what does phonics instruction look like. So.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. A couple of comments from the Q&A. One specifically about religion. This individual, I appreciate the comment, says religion should not be taught in elementary school, period. I don't care how you sugarcoat it about being educational. It's still teaching young kids about religion, which has been removed from school by law. Why is it being pushed again, but only a specific few? None should be included. This is frustrating. So let me just address this for a minute. So number one, as we talk about religion in schools, the standard is that we have to maintain neutrality when it comes to religion. So we can't prohibit students from the free exercise of their religion, and we also can't endorse or promote any specific religion. And as our representatives from Amplify talked about, that's exactly the approach that Amplify takes. Is they have books that are helping kids understand across the world the different religions that are there. I'll just say I don't believe you can teach world history without teaching religion. It is too much of a significant part of our history as a people to say we can't teach it. And I'll go back to even I don't think we've never not taught Greek mythology and Roman mythology in our elementary schools, and that was a religion at the time. And so I appreciate the sentiment. Again, I promise we will always maintain strict neutrality when it comes to that, but we really cannot teach world history concepts without some discussion about religion. And Jason was actually a former world history teacher. I'm not, but anything else you want to add to that, Jason? Or at least he was a social studies major. Maybe a better way to say that.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. If you look at the standards, it talks about people and how people and cities and governments and really how that I'm trying to think of the civilization started and then functioned, and really a big part of that is it tied back to some type of religion of how people functioned, and those are a part of our Idaho standards.
Thank you, Jason. And then one more, this topic did come up a little bit in our thought exchange as well, but there's been some concern expressed about the scope and sequence for the skills portion. Maybe, I don't think we go into an in-depth discussion, maybe just a quick overview of how was the scope and sequence for the skills portion developed?
Yeah, and what I did here is I pulled up kindergarten, because I think the comment was directly mentioning kindergarten. Here's an example of the kindergarten skills scope and sequence. So the first we call it a sound spelling you're going to teach in kindergarten or in CKLA is the same day you teach to hear it and say it, you teach them how to write it. The next day you teach and you teach them how to write it. So you can see here the phonics they're learning in day 2 is the sound, and then they are also learning how to write the sound. Now we have to get through the basic phonemes before we can get into the more advanced ones like an SH or a TH, but they're all there and they come in. Capital letters are taught as well. What might be different is on lesson 1, we're not going to teach lowercase and uppercase We're just going to teach lowercase initially, keeping it very explicit and kind of and then we keep capital letters. And what's really interesting for me as a kindergarten teacher to teach this was the approach to teaching capital letters was different than I'd always done. It actually talks about how a lot of the letters are the same when they're lower and uppercase. They're just bigger and they hit the top line versus the midline. And then we go, but there's some that look different. And so that was kind of such an explicit way to really ensure that all students kind of walk away. But so the scope and sequence here, you know, we start with at, because you can do mat, and then we can jump right into starting to blend sounds. So we pick them in this order so we can jump to blending as quickly as possible. But I did put this link to this document as the answer to the question.
Thank you so much for providing that link to us. And Phil, I'm going to do one last check back on Facebook and see if there's anything else here on Facebook.
Yeah, just a quick question about how this applies to special ed.
Great question. So, and yeah, we haven't really talked a whole lot about that, but there is the intervention piece to this as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I think that's I think that's something that, you know, CKLA is the core of your tier 1 of your MTSS model, right? And so CKLA checks that box. We have tons of efficacy data showing how CKLA actually reduces the need for tier 3 intervention. But then what comes free with CKLA is tools that can be used in an MTSS model. But Amplify does actually sell like tier 2 programs and tier 3 programs, but CKLA is our tier 1 programs. That's what we've been talking about today.
Perfect. Thank you.
And that's what I would have said is what we're looking. A special education student should be getting that tier 1, that core curriculum that all the other students would be getting, and then they would get that intervention based on that specific need that they would need for special education.
Perfect. Thank you. So just to wrap up this part, at least, we do have just a couple other slides to share on other topics tonight. But where you can view the materials, again, they're all available right outside of Jason's office or in the district office at 3497 North Emmond Road. So again, district office is open 7:30 to 4:30 Monday through Friday. So please feel free to stop by and browse through those or look through those. And again, if you go to this website, the D93 reading, I'm going to go back to my slide really quickly so you can see that reading adoption, d93.org/reading adoption. That takes you to this website that we created that goes through a lot of the things we talked about tonight. And then it does also provide this demo account where you can go to learning.amplify.com. You can log in with the accounts that have been provided to us. And on there, you can read all of the materials that are provided there as well. So for those of you that are here specifically for reading CKLA, thank you so much for taking the time tonight. Thank you so much to our helpers from Amplify CKLA. And again, really looking to have you provide your thoughts and your feedback to us, especially after you take some time to read through those materials. And so once you go through and you read those materials, then please go to our thought exchange, which is, I need to get that link in there. So is it there?
It's in there. It's
right there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
So how can I share my thoughts about the Amplify CKLA materials? d93.org/Amplify Thoughts is the link to that, on that webpage. And we'd love to get all of your input on this. So again, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. And we'll let we have some of our presenters that are on the East Coast, so they're now pushing almost 11 o'clock back east. Thank you so much for taking your time tonight. And we'll say goodbye to you for the evening. And I've just got a couple slides to share with our community on some other things that are happening in our school district. So thank you for being with us tonight.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
So just a couple of quick updates from our last school board meeting. First one, just had some awesome student recognition at the last school board meeting. We actually had to move it to the Rocky Mountain Auditorium because of the number of kids that were recognized for their outstanding accomplishments, recognizing our state champions, which were the Bonneville High School cheer team, who were the overall state champions, which is in 4A, fantastic accomplishment, kind of a comeback win. I like Cinderella stories. I like March Madness and seeing, and I don't want to refer to our Bonneville High School cheer team as an underdog, but I think they placed third in districts, if I remember right. JC, you can correct me if I'm wrong there. But then came back strong at state and were overall champions at state. And then our Thunder Ridge High School dance team were the military champions at state. Our Thunder Ridge High School girls wrestling team took home a state championship, and then an individual state champion, Talanek, who was actually a third time state champion in wrestling. So just some great accomplishments from our kids that we were able to recognize at that board meeting. In that board meeting, we also did have to certify another emergency closure from that late spring snowstorm that we had. And so with that, just a quick update on our instructional hours. With our emergency closures, we have now used all the hours that we have built into our calendar in 4th through 6th grades. You can see we're down to 1.25 hours left for them. So hopefully the snow abates and we don't have another April snow closure like we had a few years back. If we do, I would say we're likely petitioning to the state to see if we could get a waiver, because our other grade levels, we still have 1 day left in 9th grade, 10th grade, and 11th grade. And so we'd really just be looking at the 4th through 6th grade. So I think we'd likely try to petition the state first to see if we could get a waiver. If that were to be denied, we'd have to look at doing some different things with their time to make sure that we are in compliance with the state law, meeting the minimum number of instructional hours for that grade level. And then the last thing I just wanted to highlight tonight, it is that time of year where we're asking our parents and our employees to provide their feedback to us. Some good questions in there, asking for my performance as superintendent, asking for performance at the how the district is doing, as well as how things are going for parents and employees at your school. So really appreciate people taking the time to complete those questions. I promise those surveys matter a lot. We go through, we read them, we look for areas that we can improve. We look to find the things that we should be celebrating with our schools. They really help us set our priorities for the coming year. So I would appreciate it if our parents and employees would all take the time to go in and complete those surveys. I want to remind our employees that, as I put in the newsletter, these are not anonymous, and so you do log in with your school account. The reason we put that in is so that we could then break down different responses by employee groups. So for example, as we look at job satisfaction, we could see how are our bus drivers doing compared with our custodians, how are our certified staff doing compared with our classified staff, are there any spots that we need to pay special attention to. And so by having you log in, that saves answering about 10 to 12 different survey questions. So they're not anonymous, but I promise you, I promise they are confidential, and no individual will ever be called out for their responses to that survey. I will not share individual responses with principals or supervisors, and honestly, I'm not even interested in looking at it myself. And so, we did a quick look over this today to see how things went. Candidly, some employees shared some pretty candid and critical feedback with me. I didn't bother to go in to see, okay, who was it that said that thing about me? I want to look at the feedback. I want to see overall how people feel like we're doing and see what areas can we get better at. And so I hope that people know that if they feel comfortable sharing that level of candid criticism of me and things that they think I need to be doing better, that you can share that if there's other areas where you feel like that'd be helpful. At the same time, I really hope our employees will take time to recognize good things that are happening, and our parents too. So if there's something that's going really well at your school and your department, please make sure to complete that so that we can share the good news with our principals as well and our supervisors. So please take time to respond to those. The link for our parents is d93.org/parent survey. And for our employees, it's d93.org/staff engagement. So those will actually probably be open longer than April 7th, but really by April 7th, we'll be collecting that data. And again, not sharing back individual responses, but sharing back reports with our principals to see, and our supervisors overall, how are things going in their departments. So with that, Phil, that's all the slides that I had. So I'm just going to pause and see any other questions out there from our viewers that have stuck with us on Facebook.
I just wanted to say that Shauna Anderson also got a state championship from wrestling.
Oh, crap. Thank you. I knew there's one. So thank you so much for reminding me. I did that off the top of my head, and I thought we did have that individual girl state champion as well, which is awesome. So I think that's our first girl state champion. So definitely want to recognize Shauna. Thanks, Sam.
And there was a one more question in the Q&A. well, really just a response. It says the response for how the program applies to special education seems really fast, considering how many students are not on tier 1. And I would say it was fast, especially as it pertains to Amplify. Our Wendy Landon, who is our new special education director for this school year, has really been doing some inventory of what do we have program-wise, what do we have for students. And I know she has been working with for math, some math resources for our special education teachers and students. But with Amplify, we have had conversations about their intervention piece for special education, and we'll be looking at that. There's also been some resources purchased for our extended resource rooms. And so, yeah, I mean, we're always looking for resources how to help students, especially in those tier 2, tier 3 situations.
Yeah, but I do think it's also important to know that we really believe that by providing the right resources at tier 1, we'll see less of a need for tier 2 and tier 3. And over, that's a principle that we learn and are taught. And that is, until you have tier 1 instruction and resources correct, you're always going to have an issue with tier 2 and tier 3. So apologize, that's kind of education speak for maybe some of our parents, but really tier 1 is just what should every kid be learning in the classroom. And the better job we do there, the less need we'll have to do referrals to special education programs and other additional help and support for kids. So Phil, anything else out there on Facebook?
So there was one, they said they're going to the parent survey link and it says this survey is not currently active.
So is that the engagement survey?
I don't know. Megan, Tracy, can you answer if that is
Yep, I just got that response myself. Okay, thank
Okay.
you so much for letting me know. I will get that fixed. I'm not sure what's happening there, but I'll get that fixed. So I'll have that fixed tonight. Appreciate that type of feedback. That's super helpful to know.
I think we're all caught up. It was kind of fun. We had almost as many people in participating on the Zoom as on Facebook. It's fun to see people involved and caring about the future of D93. And I know you guys care deeply. It keeps you up at night, and we all do. And it's nice to see that support from our community.
Yeah, it was great. Really appreciate the people who took time tonight to join us. And again, just looking for the feedback through Thought Exchange to help us make the best decision we can with this. So again, please stop by the district office, look at the materials, or go to that webpage and take a look at them online and read through and let us know if there's things you have questions or concerns about.
Well, and we really do want the feedback. When Scott and I were meeting this morning, looking at the Thought Exchange, and I don't want to say we were well, I'd say we were disappointed. We want more than 40 to 50 people completing that Thought Exchange, because it just helps us make decisions that are hard decisions that we, not that it's ever perfect, but we want to make the best decision that we can.
Absolutely. Like we talked about, it's a big investment, both in terms of our dollars and a big investment in terms of our teacher learning and implementation time. So we definitely want to make sure we're taking the time to do it right. And that depends on getting great feedback from our teachers and from our families. So thank you again for taking the time tonight. Thank you for all the help and support. And we'll look forward to doing this again in a month. So thanks everybody, and have a great night.